Hello, everybody. Welcome back. Today we have Teja Myneedu with us. With a career spanning over 2 decades, Teja has worked on the front lines of product security at hyper-growth companies like Splunk, where he developed a powerful philosophy for scaling security not just with tools but with context and automation. Teja is currently the senior director of security and trust at Navan, where he operates at the complex intersection of fintech and corporate travel. A world where securing financial transactions is just as critical as ensuring the physical duty of care for global travelers. He leads product and platform security, enterprise security, detection and response, and customer identity. He's a frequent speaker at major industry events like OWASP Global AppSec and a passionate advocate for building security programs on a foundation of developer empathy and innovative solutions. Teja, welcome to the show. We are super excited to have you here.
Thanks, guys. Thanks for having me, and it's great to speak to people that I've worked with a long time ago. So
Yeah.
it's exciting.
Is there anything else you wanted to add to that intro that you want our audience to know about yourself?
No, I think that was a great introduction. I think the only thing I would add is really, as you mentioned, I've transitioned from being focused on product security, product and application security, to lead a few other organizations within security, and it's been very interesting to see how application security or software security is still a part of, let's say, enterprise security in many ways, right? And it's still a part
Yeah,
of how we work with incident response and detection response teams, etc. So it's been an interesting transition to really see software is everywhere, and now that
yeah,
we're building software a lot more than we used to, I guess the impact of how uh, securing products or applications it doesn't truly start just at the boundary of writing code. It's in
mm,
a lot more places throughout the enterprise. So it's been interesting to have that worldview. But overall, I think my
yeah,
experience is very similar to most other practitioners in that sense.
yeah. No, I think so. Maybe we can just start there. Your career started along with us, right, as a practitioner, and then you slowly transitioned into leading multiple teams, right? So, uh, looking back at your 2 decades or so in the industry, right, what was the single most surprising or counterintuitive lesson that you've learned about what makes a security program successful? And as you answer that, just kind of also shed some light on how it is working with different teams that we weren't part of before,
Mm.
and teams that are not security focused, so to speak.
Right. I mean, at a high level, I think um, the biggest thing that I have changed my opinion on over time is around security through obscurity, or how we have harder stance on how security should operate, right? My belief has become that, hey, the security breaches happen not because you didn't find the next cool thing, but because you didn't do the hard work, the dirty work of, tightening access or looking at individual vulnerabilities, doing all that work, right? So from that standpoint, I have come to believe that, security by obscurity is not a bad thing. Anything that helps security, actually protect the enterprise is not a bad thing. So I don't know if it's entirely counterintuitive, but I'm willing to take a good improvement over perfect any day, right? So it's always, hey, let me improve security by 1% a day or like 2% a day in whatever ways possible. So if that means like as practitioners, or I certainly was of this opinion always that, hey, putting in a WAF rule and not fixing the bug, is a huge problem. But now that I'm looking at a larger surface area, I'm trying to be a lot more practical about how can I, truly protect our customers. How, like, from that standpoint, anything you do as an incremental step now, I think the sense of urgency around it is a lot more important to improve security today. It's not to say that, hey, let's not push for the best, but it's more of, hey, how can we practically make things better, as opposed to trying to shoot for perfection, trying to make the case within the organization, and but then delaying in that process truly actually securing the perimeter.
Okay.
Go ahead, Anjuman.
No, yeah, that's fascinating that your um, understanding and mindset has evolved over time. I think, yeah, security through obscurity has always been a thing that I've also personally struggled with. Is, if you're really, if the intention is to secure something, right, and if you're just adding a layer on a particular platform or system, you know without really securing it under the hood, is it really moving the needle, so to speak, right? And yeah, I think what you said makes sense, right? It's like any incremental step towards a larger goal, even if it is not addressing the root cause. Let's say, with that, I think it's still good, because it makes it difficult for the bad actors to, it just slightly makes it more difficult. And I think that's the fundamental point that I think I go by is, uh, how can we make the lives of bad actors difficult, right? So that it's just not worth the ROI for them to try to get into any organization. Um, yeah,
Yeah, I mean, I think anything that increases the economic complexity of
that's right.
an attack, right? So, I mean, we all know very well that one of the things that is now happening a lot more, and you've probably seen Anthropic's report about the bad actors trying to use AI to exploit or at least discover surface area, right? Is I think both on the defender side and on the attacker side, the barrier to entry is definitely reducing, mainly because the amount of cognitive effort it takes to try and explore through all paths of, like, hey, if something did not work, if I try to explore like an endpoint or a specific payload, the cognitive load was always on us as humans, as pen testers, or on the offensive side, or also on the defensive side. If you're threat modeling, how do you not miss all the things? Like, on a good day you may catch 50 things, on a bad day you're not doing well, you miss like 10 things. How do you figure this out, right? And I think, and again, from a security through obscurity standpoint, it's not great that you're putting together a patch. All I'm saying is, before the defensive side evolves to catch up to attackers are already using all possible ways of discovering something, is it not better for us to take the first step immediately of trying to put
Yeah.
together some kind of WAF rule or do something that actually secures the enterprise on step one, and then let's try to secure the rest of it instead of trying to be ideal, right? So I think that's where my sense of urgency or heightened sense of risk actually led me to believe that security by obscurity, WAF rules, whatever you want to call it, but now there is like a lot more risk of undiscovered surface area being discovered much faster than before.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I wasn't going to mention the Anthropic report, but since you did, um, like that raises a question about whether security through obscurity is actually effective or not, right? Just because we've seen from the report that bad actors can just deploy agents, and agents, the way they work is, they'll explore all possible opportunities to get into any organization. So even if you have a WAF, whatever it is, and it might stop the bleeding, but until how long, right? So I think it boils down to, okay, how long can your security through obscurity measures can um, protect you or safeguard you, right? So yeah, I think it's the sense of urgency what you mentioned, is what I agree with. Is,
Yeah,
you know
yeah. I mean, I absolutely don't want to, caught as a be caught as a security professional saying that, hey, I'm happy with security.
yeah,
That's not
That's
exactly.
the
right.
headline, by the way, Teja, of the episode. Okay.
Yeah.
Like,
But I
Yeah,
think what I'm saying basically is, security through obscurity helps. Let's not, like, basically the underlying point here is, let's not make perfect the enemy of good.
yeah.
Let's try to do everything we can to help our customers, like, securing our platforms, and uh, the more important thing, especially with bad actors using agents, we know for a fact that they are evolving, and for them the barrier to entry is much lower, because as enterprises, as you work in larger organizations building companies, you cannot make changes. Like you cannot say, hey, I don't care, I'll break login for all my customers and then like push a new non-backwards compatible login mechanism, and customers will figure it out. No, right? You have to think about the user experience and a lot, everything else, which obviously makes your job as a defender more complicated, and therefore you need to take any measure possible to have that sense of urgency and to try to minimize the risk immediately. And
Yeah.
I'm not going to wait for an ideal fix, like or a complicated fix for an engineer to make for in like 2 weeks. I'm going to try and do everything I can in my capacity to plug the hole, plug the bleeding right then, and then follow up. So the follow up is as critical, and then follow up with the actual fix.
Yeah. I mean, I think you make a good point, right? And I think a lot of these biases come from very insecurity you start. All of us kind of start in application security, which is a few like kind of degrees of separations between real action, so to say, in security than kind of like AppSec is. I feel like people who worked either in IT security or started their career in incident response never even have this debate. Like this is not a question they ask. They're like, I mean, of course, if you're under attack, who the hell cares, right? I mean, just do whatever it takes to stop the attack, or like especially people, I've seen people who work in IT security in large organizations, people talking about, oh, DLP slows you down and stuff like that. But they're like, yeah, it's the first level of defense for me. So the first level of defense has to be there. Everybody has a plan till you get punched in the face and all that, right? So, yeah. So when I used to be heading AppSec and then heading security at a FinTech, and we used to have constant DDoS attacks. Nobody really cared about what the elegant solution is. They're like, dude, stop the flow of attacks first, and then we'll think about making it elegant or making it work or making it scalable and all that. So I'm kind of with you, like whatever it takes, it helps. But I guess of course there's kind of a difference between managing risk and kind of like eliminating it, right? So when your proximate goal is to manage this, that's great, but eventually you want to have less risky things come through in production, and then is the time to kind of think about long-term solutions, elegant solutions, etc. But in the heat of the moment, when something goes wrong, I mean, do whatever it takes to stop is kind of, I mean, even I've run bug bounty programs in the past, and then when you find like a interesting ethical hacker who's kind of on the borderline ethical practices, I mean, my first line of defense was picking up the phone and talking to them and being kind of like trying to talk them down from doing dumb stuff. Like that was our defense, like not actually solving the problem, because that takes another 24 hours to do. So yeah, so
Right.
whatever it takes to solve the problem to start with, and then over time you kind of make sure that you kind of build the muscle to do things right. Makes a
Yeah,
lot
and,
of
and
sense.
the only nuance I am trying to add there is it's not even when you're under attack, right? Like the moment you get to know about the
Mm,
risk, like
sure.
I've tried. I've become a little more, I guess, risk averse in that sense that I'm willing to take any measure. Even I think there is an interesting dilemma from a risk standpoint, right? So, which has like I don't know if you guys have opinions. I'd love to hear those too, but let's say there is X vulnerabilities, and we all know as security practitioners that like especially libraries and CVEs within libraries and those kinds of issues, you see a whole bunch of them in any organization, and there is this uh, dilemma between, hey, do you present all this risk and have people look at this and say, hey, this is a mountain that I cannot climb, let's just ignore everything and move forward, or do you truly prioritize and in that case get it like risk the chance of that being ignored, right? So that's the sorry, not that being ignored, but risk the chance of the real issues never being addressed. So how do
Yeah.
you work through this prioritization loop? And I'm okay, right? I think the conclusion I've come to is, if you're truly prioritizing, I'm okay trying to, say, hey, let's put together other countermeasures. So this will have this be ignored. But I've also heard, people like in security say, hey, why put a band-aid? Because that will give them justification for not addressing the root cause. And therefore, let me have the issue stay as is and then push for resolution.
I I
Oh,
don't think we can hear you, Sundesh.
oh,
Yeah,
sorry
go
about
ahead.
that.
And
Yeah, so
go ahead.
it's a good point, right? I mean, if you talk to kind of like really large old school enterprises like banks, they have like solid frameworks for these things. Did we lose Teja?
I think his video is just choppy. Go ahead.
Okay. Yeah. So if you
I
talk to
think.
like large enterprises, what ends up happening is that they have like really solid frameworks for these things. So they have like risk management frameworks where they're like for every risk, they're like, hey, is the goal to avoid the risk, to reduce the risk or eliminate the risk, etc. And then based on what life cycle stage you're in, you will have to deal with it. Like for example, if you have a legacy application written in Fortran, which is still managed by two people who have access to the mainframe, then yeah, I mean fixing the root cause is incredibly expensive on how to do it, right? So at that point, it becomes very hard. And at that point, you kind of focus more on protecting the app rather than actually fixing the application or fixing whatever the underlying infrastructure is. The second framework to think about is how expensive is it to kind of solve it versus how expensive would a breach be, right? So there's another framework there as well to say, hey, I'll make a decision based on cost, right? I mean, the third way of looking at it, which is kind of my favorite, is that all prioritization is flawed. Like no matter what you do, you can never get prioritization right anyway. So the idea is not should I fix low or high or medium. It's just a way to match how much time you have allocated to fixing vulnerabilities versus how much work you can do. And then based on that, if you cannot fix everything, and if you have to pick, only then prioritization comes into the picture, right? So so from that perspective, you have to almost always assume that something you marked as low risk is what will come and bite you in the backside at some point anyway, right? So I mean, I kind of feel like everybody has to approach with the fact that prioritization is flawed and it only works until it does. And then at some point it'll fail and then you'll wonder why you mark that as a low or a medium risk, right? So the best thing to do is to not worry too much about prioritization. And if you do prioritization, definitely not worry about like industry standard prioritization stuff and focus more on what it means for your company. Every company has its own things. Like, for example, I used to work at a payment gateway at some point. Payment gateways are more like infrastructure. Like downtime is way more important than data breach. Doesn't mean data breach is not important. But right, so if availability is a risk, then everything's high. Right. So at that point, for that company, for that scenario, risk ranking is very different from say like an insurance company where data breach is probably the most important thing that can happen. But yeah.
Yeah, I think there's another thought, like especially about prioritization. I find that some teams spend more time in prioritizing than actually addressing the things that need to be addressed. So there's a more fundamental question is whether prioritization is even worth the ROI of what it allows you to do, and how do you know whether whatever you're prioritizing is actually how it should be, right? So I feel like this topic is so nuanced, and there's no right or wrong answer, unfortunately. And I also feel like security tools and products don't help in prioritization either, because they don't understand the context, they don't understand people, processes, tools, all of that stuff, right? So yeah, I think as AppSec engineers, right, like I have used the word prioritization pretty loosely, um, to get out of situations, right? At times I'm not proud of them, and I've realized that it's a lot more nuanced than that. Just kind of saying that go prioritize stuff, there's a bunch of decisions that go underneath that. So yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I think it's been interesting to just see the opportunity. That's why in like with AI and
yeah,
usage of like building context, etc. Right, where prioritization, to your point, do you really need to prioritize if you could fix? And I think now we are entering the era of, hey, can we actually reduce the cognitive load on the engineers, and can we actually bring them closer to fix, and can we focus on actually solving the problem, which I guess for most of our careers where we have worked in AppSec, it felt like we were working with incomplete tools. If you remember, pre Chrome Dev Tools era of JavaScript, how people used to debug JavaScript, or even SRE as a function, or DevOps as a function, how it evolved to be more of a software engineering function, because all the diagnosis tools evolved, things became a lot more predictable, and we've built frameworks to actually uh, truly diagnose problems properly, and then also be able to get to the point where you can address the fix. I think AppSec is now going through that journey, perhaps, and now we are closer to a phase where maybe it's not, we don't have to make it a problem of an engineer anymore, and we have the context, so we can drive towards truly saying, hey, like, if we're saying, hey, this idealistic policy, which used to be idealistic to say 30, 60, 90-day sort of remediation timelines for everything, where I think the highs or criticals were never a problem, or like were rarely a problem, because you could always make the case for it. But how do you get everybody to prioritize a low severity or something that is classified as a low severity issue, and get you to address that? I think those are the aspects where I see a lot more opportunity now, where we can say, hey, like, let's actually get this addressed, and like, let's follow the policy as well.
I mean, since I have like two practitioners right now on the two security folks on the call, right? Let me ask you this question. One of the things that's changed kind of at least when I used to run a security team, it was almost like a cardinal sin for security folks to go fix vulnerabilities, because the idea is, hey, fixing is up to the developers, right? You can manage vulnerabilities, you can turn on a WAF rule, you can set rate limits, you can do stuff on the perimeter, but actual fixing of code is the job of the developers. It's their holy kingdom. You don't breach that. Is kind of the point, right? Now, if you're going to have tools which can actually go into code, understand context, select PR, create PRs, right, for security issues, then has the ownership now slightly shifted, where you basically say, hey, if I find a security vulnerability in code, I'll also fix it, and then create a PR, and then maybe some engineer actually just approves the PR, and if they do, then things are good? Or are you seeing a shift where developers are okay using such tools, but it's still not security team's responsibility to actually push a fix to production, specifically if it requires a fix in code?
Yeah, I can go first there. I feel like my stance on this has not changed a lot, even before pre AI and post AI, and I say that because I've always held the belief that security engineers should know, like, if they can find vulnerabilities, they should know how to fix them. If you look at companies like Facebook, Google, right, like, security engineers, they're actually raise PRs to fix issues. I mean, you can argue that those engineers are smarter as compared to other, but I don't want to go there. But having like said that, I really believe now with AI, it's actually become very easy for security engineers to raise PRs to fix issues. In fact, that is something that I have started to do internally at Lyft, right? Where if I find something, I don't wait for the engineering teams to triage it, to sort of assess the impact, all of that stuff. I simply use AI to propose a fix, and I have the engineers go and take a look at it, and they just have to approve or reject, right? So I feel like that's been my, at least, the utopian land I've always dreamt of, and I think we are finally there using AI. So that's my take. I'm curious to hear what you think, Teja.
Yeah, so on my end, I think what you said, Anshuman, is maybe a little ideal. I'm going to be a little spicy here on that, right? But in a sense that
Go for it.
I
Yeah.
don't think the security team knowing how to fix the security issue is never a problem, right? So I think the security issue will be fixed. The problem is the tribal knowledge around, hey, you've fixed an API where it's, let's say there was no authorization before, and now you have added authorization to say, hey, the user whose session it is, only their data, they should be able to retrieve their own data, etc. Right? The problem is now you realize, once you make that fix, that there are 5 other places where service to service calls are coming from the same API, where the authorization expectation is different. Now, so I think that in most of the cases, it's not the actual fix that's a problem. It's all the downstream effects of the fix breaking things that it shouldn't be breaking. That's a problem, and that's why I guess we've always said, hey, it's the job of the engineers, because you can do the security fix, but you cannot ensure that the product is reliable after that. And now I think there is more promise the security fix, taking into account some of this context more, right? So I think that's still not solved as such. I think we are in a better position to actually make PRs and do this faster. But let's say you have now an MCP server that talks to your logs, and an MCP server that looks at the code, and now you are saying, hey, like, fix this bug, but let me see how this API endpoint is actually being used in production. And you see that, hey, this fix is also going to break a few other things, right? So I think having that additional context, and I think the most critical part again here is the amount of time and effort it takes to get to a point where you don't just you always knew the security context, you always could make the security fix itself. But how do you cross that chasm of that being production ready, reliable, not causing any other breakage? I think that was much harder before. And I don't think it's solved yet. But the promise of AI is to get to that point where all the tribal knowledge of the organization, for
Yeah.
the lack of a better term, I think most, not just security engineers or other like developers, but most people in engineering organizations used to have this problem of being I don't know, product archaeologists or code archaeologists, where they had to go dig up the context, right? That was the biggest problem. And I think with AI, I think that's where I see the most productivity, where I don't have to ask someone who has been in the company for 5 years about this context, or at least I can try to discover 80% of that context myself, and then try to, make that PR as production ready as possible. So I think we're getting there, hopefully. And I've seen enough startups that say, hey, I think Google released something a couple of weeks ago, right? Which says Code Wiki, where it
Yeah.
lets you
It's
interact
very
with
cool.
code. So
Yeah.
I think having that territory become the map, and the whole code base and the product sort of evolution being mapped entirely, makes it easier for tools eventually and security engineers to take all of that into context and then apply a reasonable PR which is production ready. I think that's where there is promise. We're still working through that, I think.
Yeah. So, okay, couple of points because you guys raised some very interesting questions. So, one, Anshuman, to your point about companies like Meta and Google are doing it. Does that mean the security engineers are smarter? I think it's a slightly different reason why they do it. I feel like in companies where you have fantastic unit test coverage, it's easier for security engineers to be confident that the security fix will not break something else. So, if you have theoretically 100% unit test coverage, then I'll have a lot more confidence. Even the developer will have a lot more confidence saying, yeah, this PR kind of makes sense. I don't have to think too much about it. It probably works because, all my unit tests passed because of this, right? Interestingly, LLM coding tools make it easier to get increased unit test coverage. What's sad is I haven't really seen companies go, oh, I have access to Claude Code or Cursor, so let me go actually increase my unit test coverage instead of writing like 300 more things, 50% of which is AI slop, right? So no one's actually saying, hey, let me actually clear backlog, let me actually improve test coverage, test case coverage using AI. I mean, I know some individual developers do, but if we do that, I think weirdly increasing test coverage has more impact on security than a lot of actual security things, because that in the sense gives you a lot of confidence about writing stuff, right? The second thing on the whole security engineers writing code, I agree with you that they should have the ability. And today, if security engineers can't write code, then it's a dead end. Like 5 years ago, I think it was excusable. Today, it's not excusable because you have freaking Claude Code. Designers are writing code. PMs are writing code. I mean, we should be able to write code too. But there is one security engineer for 100 developers. If there is actually a repo where you have a developer who owns the repository, and if they don't have the bandwidth to fix security issues for whatever reason, will really 1% of the engineering bandwidth, like, there are probably like, 5 engineers for 400, 5 security engineers for 400 developers. If those 400 developers don't have the time to fix these issues, will the 5 developers really have the time to do it? Right. So something's off to me if the security team, in addition to kind of doing everything they do, also have to almost like write code, not for security reasons, but for, to improve the quality, security of their repositories. So I kind of feel like it's weird, which kind of, and when we have such opinions, I kind of feel like it basically means all of us are right, and it depends on context, which is true for everything anyway. But yeah, that's kind of how I look at the whole ratio thing. But yeah, my sense is that if we could just use LLMs to increase test coverage in existing companies, that'll have a much larger impact on security than most other things we can actually do.
Yeah. I'll try to summarize what I think we have landed on is. So I definitely agree with both of you that my views are a little bit idealistic, but I think those were idealistic pre AI, because absolutely, the fact that I expect security engineers to raise PRs when there was no AI, yeah, it's too good to be true. I've tried to do that myself and I've failed at it miserably. And I think, to your point, like Sandesh, right, especially if we consider the ratio of security engineers versus engineers, there's no way a single security engineer knows all the context, all the institutional knowledge that most of these individual developers have in order to fix something, right? So absolutely. But I think my mental model sort of has continued to evolve, and I think with post AI, right, especially around increasing test coverage, is a good point, because you know, if you really are seeing a world where software gets developed, shipped, fixed, everything automatically, you have to make sure that whatever fixes you're proposing, they are getting validated, which kind of brings me to this point of having a verifier component in pretty much all of these SDLC workflows, right? So yes, I think pre AI, I would agree that I was being a little too idealistic, but I think post AI we are seeing a lot of different solutions, opportunities, and also the space is very promising in the sense that even though security engineers might not have the institutional knowledge or the context, they can learn about it by simply using AI based tools, right? And if they're not doing that already, then I think that's something that should be changed, I feel, right? So yeah, any sort of follow-ups to that? I think you're on mute, Sandesh.
It's like Dependabot from 4 years ago. Dependabot did this 5 years ago, where if you had like a V0.93 was vulnerable, but V0.95 was not vulnerable, it would just bump it up in your dependencies file, and then there would be like tens of thousands of orphan PRs which nobody ever looked at, right? And the complaint I always heard from developers is because, well, that's all a crappy upgrade. It wasn't that, oh, a tool created a PR and I won't accept. It was that it was not a good update, because
Yeah.
0.94 was neither vulnerable and it worked fine and it cleared the test cases. So if it said 0.94, I would have probably said yes, right? So the complaint I always heard from developers was not that a tool is creating a PR or a security person is creating a PR. It was that the PR was bad. Right.
Ah,
So if in the end your tooling improves and your quality of PR improves, then I don't, there's a world where maybe developers don't care and they'll get more and more trust, and then when that happens, it goes away. But again, the only thing that I have a hard time wrapping my head around is that all these tools which are available with the security teams are also available with engineers, and engineers also have access to all these things, and they have a much narrower scope than security engineers. So why aren't they using it, right? So there are legacy repos where there's no developer attached, it's in maintenance mode. Sure, security engineers should go create PRs and even merge code and maybe take some ownership of it. But in a world where there's active development happening, I mean, if they can't do it, then how can we, is kind of the way I think about it.
ah.
But I think it boils down to good PRs in that. If you can do good PRs, it'll probably work.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, speaking about context, Teja, I am curious to hear, right? Like, um, what specific data points, according to you, constitute the product context, right? And how do you automate the collection and maintenance of that context without overburdening the engineers?
Right. I mean, I think the basic, the easier to sort of identify ones are within the code repository itself and the infrastructure itself, right? I think, how do you define product and product boundaries? Um, I think we have tried to do it at application layer, but what application means also has evolved quite a bit. But overall, I think the simplest way I think about it is, if you can look at the code and the deployment infrastructure as a whole, and glean insights from that, that is 80% of the job done. But and the harder part always is the rest of the 20%, which is the ownership aspect of it, right? So that's always been the hard part to get context of. And apart from ownership, there's also just the intent and what is the actual use case and the business case. So I think those are aspects which are hard to gather. The Obviously, there is now tools which are able to stitch all of that together, and despite all of that, I think the underlying context about let's say reorgs and how teams change and who owns things, that's super hard to track in any organization. The underlying context about product direction and what is prioritized, like, you can read up a whole bunch of Confluence documents or Google Docs, but the relevance of it, how does recent information take priority over the older information, how do you pick and choose? I think those are harder parts of the context. But again, the not to say that that hinders us, right? So now even without all of that context, we are at a much better place than ever before to truly understand the context. We're just looking at everything within code and everything within infrastructure.
Yeah, yeah. I think context engineering, yeah, is, I think we're going to see a lot more of that, right, in 2026 and onwards. And I hope at least security vendors also pay attention to how can they actually gather context from their customers, because
Was
I
there a
think
sly message
that's
for me, Anshman? Just kidding.
well, yeah, maybe, I don't know. I think, and I'm sure you understand that really well, right? So I just feel like that's the missing piece, at least in all of the vendors I evaluate, right? It's like how or what are you doing to get context from us, right? And I think nobody has a good answer to that, and obviously so it's not that straightforward. Like I
Yeah.
mentioned, there's business impact, there's attribution, there's so many things going on.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Sorry.
no, go
What I
ahead.
wanted to say was the opportunity though is immense, right? To your point about, so if people are generating code and what we are now saying as devslop, we are saying, hey, we need the reason why there is so much devslop, and everybody is who's hopeful that, hey, great secure code will be automatically generated. We always, I guess, again, as practitioners, perhaps keep giving examples of how the LLM is trained perhaps on insecure code, and therefore it's not better. uh, and I think the answer or the opportunity is really, hey, everybody who's in the creative process of creating a feature isn't thinking of all the constraints. So if you can codify the constraints properly, and now we are seeing startups around, how do they add those constraints to the prompts themselves, so, or as a guardrail layer or a moderation layer to validate that code conforms to whatever secure coding best practices, right? I think the key part there is, how you can again have 100 different startups that do that, but how do you differentiate yourself is that context, right? That context is really the I don't know, the game changer in all the sense that you can say in every organization nobody wants to, let's say, put secrets in source code, but every organization has a different process of not putting them in source code and introducing them through another mechanism that gets picked up and puts in, I don't know, like a key management system somewhere, and then works with your CI process and CD process, all of that, right? So essentially, I think having, instead of saying, hey, the existing tools also tell you that don't do this, remove, but like contextualizing that and actually doing that for them is probably the opportunity that separates a tool that is using basic, whatever AI feature to translate things, as opposed to something that you're trying to truly contextualize that information and making it available specifically to the organization. So I think I'm excited for
Yeah.
eventually evolution of companies where uh, I feed them the information, and they come up with specific contextualized sort of feedback, and the next obvious step to that is if you can build that, because I think today's assistants are tomorrow's agents, right? Like today they keep learning, and then eventually they get the feedback RLHF sort of loop properly, and they evolve to become, hey, now that I've seen you give me the right suggestion 100 times, I trust you to actually make the change. So I think that's and again, I don't take that sort of decision lightly. You obviously need put in so much work to build that trust, and you can lose that trust by just creating one production incident because you made a change. But I think that's the real opportunity here, that, hey, like, how do you uh, encode those constraints, and also surface organizational constraints through tools, so they can take all of that into context in creating change.
Yeah, 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 this whole thing is very fascinating. But I'm curious to hear your thoughts on the whole secure by design. Right, this is something that we've all heard of, right? And I think this has been wishful thinking, at least until AI was a thing, right? But now with all of these AI native startups that are promising the whole secure by design spiel, right, where it is possible to generate secure code using AI. In your experience, Teja, what have you seen out there, right? Like, do you really believe that secure by design could be a thing? And I know, like, Sandesh is on call, and this is exactly what he's trying to do. So I'm actually curious to hear both your sides and see if there's any alignment there.
I mean, I think secure. If you peel back that like secure by design idea and think about what it is, right? You can only do secure by design when your design is clear on what you're building, and you have like an architecture that you can say, hey, this is how this architecture works, and these are the standard security practices I'm going to apply. So secure by design always lags the creative process, right? The creative process is first built, as in like the development process is building a new product, a new thing. And however many patterns you can think of as a security engineer of building something securely, there is going to be a new engineering pattern of combining infrastructure elements and tools in some way that you have not thought about, that you have to enable as a security engineer. And that's where the interesting part of threat modeling and doing security design reviews and all of that comes from, right? Because if it were that static, you can write up a bunch of rules and say, hey, here's how you apply secure by design principles and go do this. I think the promise now is that or the undiscovered opportunity on secured by design previously again was the tools we had to enforce that, or the feedback loops we had were very extremely slow for an organization space of delivering solutions, and they were very imperfect and manual and all of that, right? So I think there's a lot more opportunity now to at least apply the known patterns of secure by design to known patterns of architecture. And I think we can do, there's a lot more promise to do that at scale and a lot more consistently as opposed to previously. Again, like I said, if I was having a bad day as a security engineer and I did not find 10 threats, that meant there was no consistency in applying that same known bad pattern thinking and identifying the same bad patterns across the board. Now that's possible. I think the part which is harder, and I think we are all learning together, is application architectures themselves are evolving in the age of AI. And you today you say RAG is great, to tomorrow you say MCP is great, and then there's yet another thing that is being invented, right? And I think there we are still making the same old mistakes. Okay, like of like allow lists and deny lists and moderation layer solve something, or like the model inherently has to protect against something else. So I think those are interesting areas where, just like application security evolved as a field, it feels like the architecture of what an AI based solution application software is itself is evolving. And there I think we truly don't know what secure by design patterns are, and we'll have to again discover those patterns and apply. But there's a lot more promise now.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with Teja, right? But the one problem I have is secure by design has become what supply chain security was 2 years ago, what cyber security was like 5 years ago, which is it starts out with like a narrow definition of what it means, right? And then over time, it becomes so big that it basically means all of security, right? So, I mean, if you think about supply chain security, it's like what is not supply chain? Like what use of software does not rely on some other software as well, right? Everything relies on something else, and therefore everything is supply chain security, right? So similarly, I think everything's becoming secure by design. I agree with Teja. Like secure by design in my head was kind of like design state security, like the things you do before you build something to make it secure. It's kind of how it was, but now it's like, oh no, if you can do like a secure guardrail or secure by default part, that's also secure by design. If you do something else, and that's also secure by design. And who doesn't want to do secure by design? Like who wants to say no, I'll be insecure by design, but I'll be secure in implementation? I mean, it makes no sense, right? So it's kind of one of those phrases which unfortunately has completely lost its meaning. But if you define it the way Teja says it, then yeah, then I'm with him. Then it kind of makes sense. But I think this whole thing of saying, oh, we will implement securely by default, then like that's secure by default, not secure by design. So now I think we're just getting confused in like words and phrases, and secure by design now essentially means all of security, right? Which to me, I mean, that is not worth answering anymore, because that kind of helps you. If that helps you sell software, then I have sympathy for them, because I try to do the same, right?
Yeah.
So if something helps you sell software, then go ahead, use secure by design. But if I was back in a security team building security, like I mean, I'm also responsible for security of my company, and for me, secure by design is, if somebody says I'm doing secure by design, I'm like, I don't know what that means anymore. That's like saying I'm doing cybersecurity. I really don't know what that means anymore.
Yeah, I
Yeah,
mean,
this is
to your point, it's like as long as you're shooting to minimize the risk by trying to eliminate as many bad patterns, then it makes sense. But yeah, like it's really hard to say, hey, I'm building it ground up, knowing that it's just going to evolve every single day, and the patterns are going to evolve and change every single day. So, how do you ensure that it continues to be secure when things are changing so rapidly?
Yeah, I think this is the first time I probably sort of can see the nuance or difference between secure by design and secure defaults. Right. I think what Sandeshu mentioned, I think people use them interchangeably, but there's a hidden meaning or there's more like to it, right? So yeah, I didn't think of it myself like that, but it makes a lot of sense now that I think about it. So awesome. Okay, I think we have question for one more, Teja. I know we had a few more, but I think we'll just stick to one more. So speaking about AI LLMs, right? Uh, what are some novel threats introduced by integrating LLMs directly into a product, right? What kind of new security guardrails are required according to you that didn't exist 5 years ago? Like, how are you seeing that landscape evolve and change?
Yeah, I mean, right now, so obviously, I think everything that is in OWASP, again, AI, LLM, top 10, all of those are prompt injection. Everybody knows about these threats, right? And I think when you say novel threats, some of them are repeating patterns, right? But I think it's just we are now putting a lot more trust, and the trust boundary has within LLMs, and the trust boundary is again becoming super blurry because we are uh, co-locating many things together and saying, hey, this is I'm using it as a decision making engine. So I think if you peel back the layer, the again, what used to be a clear deterministic, here's how the application is going to function, now we are saying, hey, an agent is dynamically going to determine the business logic of what transaction needs to be executed. So everything within like that the agent is capable of is at risk, right? Or everything, you've essentially translated it like into that. And again, I think if I look at it practically, the uh, by following a few basics today, I think at least people we are able to secure enterprises. And what I mean by basics is you still look at principle of least privilege. You still look at, hey, what is it supposed to do, what data is it supposed to have, how can I minimize that and do and enable that. I don't know if that is going we can hold the line on that anymore, right? As we see the application architectures evolve, I think what we are saying eventually is the agent needs to have access to everything and needs to be able to decide on your behalf what needs to happen. So there, I think we are reigniting this debate of identity and authorization. That's where I see the biggest sort of challenge. uh, in every company I've been in, like, in every organization I've been in, one of the harder challenges to solve, which we've worked through as application security engineers, especially as microservices architectures involved, is authorization, right? Or access control. And now we are taking that problem and putting that on steroids, and we are saying, so authorization in a microservices world itself is a hard problem to solve. And we've eventually tried to come up with a few frameworks, right? And everybody quotes Google's Zanzibar paper, and it's still like Reback is still cognitively one of the harder frameworks to wrap your head around and everything. And now you're saying, hey, trust this agent as a delegate. So we have truly not solved, I think, that problem within the whole threat model of delegate access, like someone acting on your behalf, whether it be a machine or an agent or an entity, for a limited amount of time, right? You don't want it to have do that. And like with the right privileges, I think is one of the harder problems to solve. And I think that's been from a threat model standpoint, I don't know, like that scares me the most in terms of like how we need to evolve. But yeah, we'll see how we come together as a community to solve that.
Yeah. So we had Ken Wong on the podcast last week. Hopefully the episode will come before this, and he spoke about exactly this as well. We had a long conversation about authorization and real time access control and how we need to have some kind of FML authorization and all that. But I'm with you. I think from practitioners to researchers, everybody's basically shit scared about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, and now
I
sorry, yeah, I was just going to say,
right.
right, that seems like that's going the direction it's heading in. But on the flip side, I'm a lot more scared right now about the enterprise environment where software, like I think the software supply chain, whatever we want to call it, right? Software supply chain is browser plugins. Software supply chain is, desktop software that people are downloading, uh, not production level, software packages, npm packages people are downloading onto their desktop. Even if it's not in the production, it's a risk. So that's where I'm scared about the most today with LLMs. There is a lot of additional risk, which
Yeah.
we need to right now tackle.
Yeah. Yeah. And if this is any validation, the new OAS top 10 has access control as number one, and I think it has supply chain security as number two or three. So this kind of aligns with what all we've spoken about today, right? I think the fact that agent identity, authorization, access control in a very complex environment will continue to be even more challenging because they have been challenging before, and with AI it only adds more complexity. It's not making it any simpler. The fact that an agent, sentient being, can act on your behalf and do things, and make decisions on the fly, it's scary, right? So awesome. Yeah, this was super awesome, Teja. Thank you so much. Um, yeah, I've learned quite a few things today. Basically, just kind of different ways to think about things. So I really appreciate that. And yeah, thank you for taking the time out today. We appreciate it.
Thanks for coming on.
Okay. Thanks,
Thanks,
guys.
Sam.
Thank you for joining us. If you like the show, please share this with your friends and colleagues. If you have any questions or comments, you can reach Anshuman on Twitter at Anshuman_BH. That's ANSHUMAN_BH. And me, Sandesh, at Juba on Jeans. That's JUBBAONJEANS. See you next time.